Welcome back to our podcast. Today we have Ellie, who is the president and CEO of MindBridge AI. And MindBridge AI is an artificial intelligence or machine learning company that's looking at accounting data. And welcome to the podcast, Ellie.
Happy to be here.
Ellie, when I think of accounting, I think of the data in accounting as a big database. I've always sort of viewed it as data and the reports that we get on it, such as the income statement and the balance sheet, as merely perspectives on that data. So if we think of accounting as data, and I know your company is focused on that, there are patterns within the data itself. So perhaps you could give us a sense of how your data analytics and your AI is looking at those patterns in the data, as well as how this starts to change the whole nature of accounting, particularly auditing, forensic auditing within the accounting field itself. How does data analytics and AI start to change the very nature of how we look at accounting data?
So I'm sure that you heard over the last few years the impact of AI on many white-collar professions. Accounting is one of them that we are tackling. The issue related to accounting in general and auditing specifically it relates to the fact that over the past 100 years, the process and methodologies associated with the audit process have not really changed so much. As a matter of fact, the same way that the audit was done 100 years ago, it's still being done now, except that you are using different tools, more up-to-date tools. One of the key issues related to the audit methodology is the use of samples. And the use of sample entails statistical method where you look at a small sample of the overall population and you try to determine from the behavior of the full population. Whereas it works in some statistical areas, in certain markets, it's not necessarily true in the case of errors and fraud. And when we talk about fraud, by the way, fraud is an error with an intent. We really don't look at intent right now. We look at error as an error. And the error is showing in a pattern, in a data that is different from the population. And by the way, errors in generally will be very small. You're talking about extremely small set of transactions that determine the error set, whereas the population by itself, all the transactions, is a much larger population. So, for example, if we're talking about 1 million transactions, the errors may be 1,000. So you can see it's a very small population. Now, computers and AI especially can carry out functions that human cannot do very well. So whereas human needs to do a small sample in order to predict what the overall population behaves like, computer in our software reads every transaction and puts it through a set of algorithms, which we call control point insights. And then we score each of the transactions and surface errors associated with them based on 3 levels: low, medium, and high. We don't determine if the error actually is a problem. What we determine, we highlight and surface that we believe that this transaction needs further assessment by professional that can look at it and provide more insight into that, why this particular transaction is scoring high relative to the other ones. Generally, what we see that we look at overall population, the number of false transactions represent generally about 10 to 15%. We look at the low, the overall population may represent about 95%, about 80%, and then the remaining handful, maybe about, let's say, 5 dozens, will be medium, and about a dozen will be high. So we are really able to remove the noise associated with the transaction and pinpoint you right into the area where we believe you deserve further investigation.
Now, Ali, how does time play into this? In that, I imagine that the transactions that are taking place, somebody is trying to do a fraudulent transaction, that it takes place over time. They're not doing it in one or two transactions. That may be something that a transaction occurs, another one occurs some time interval later, maybe even months or even years. So how does time add to the complexity of what you're trying to detect, and or does it have an impact at all? Does the pattern be there regardless of how long a time frame it's executed?
The patterns, really, time is very important. The longer you have the time series to work with, the better your ability to look at the pattern. But it's not only the time. Time is one factor. You also look at the way that transactions interact. If you look at a company is a very well-established process. You have employees that you have to pay, so you have a payroll. You have suppliers that you have to pay, and they give you services or product. And you have customers that pay you. So this is a well-defined process. So we also look at the process, not only at the time series. And as you evaluate all of these transactions in a time series mode, you find out anomalies associated with some of the process coupled with the time series. So you may have anomalies associated with certain transactions should not be done at a particular time frame, but also you can have interaction among the processes that are not correct. And when you combine all of these together, you generate basically a map or series of transactions that identify high risk where you have to have professionals to do further investigation.
Well, I look at that map that you're talking about, the set of patterns, and you talked about three different levels, the low, medium, high risk. And is the low, medium, high risk based on the pattern that's unfolding or the level of certainty that you may have about the pattern itself? In other words, maybe a low risk one is the pattern could be there, but we're not sure. And the high risk is the pattern is there with a higher certainty.
So the beauty about AI is that you have the notion of machine learning or learning. So a real AI company will have, and in today's environment, by the way, it's most companies are really doing machine learning. We're really not looking as much into artificial intelligence as much as the machine learning. And data and big data is the food that makes machine learning learn, right? The computers to learn. So when you look at low, medium, and high, when you identify a certain point in time, this is a certain point in time that transaction is low, that means two things. One, initially, based on the current population, that these transactions are scoring low relative to the other ones. Now, what happens is, in other circumstances, if you, let's say, take another time series of a year before, the pattern may change completely. But when we identify and score and surface the results against the transaction, what we're talking against this data set, the given data set that you've given us, we are scoring one transaction relative to the other. And that's really important. It's one relative to the other. And we are saying in all of this population of 100%, a dozen represent, or 2 dozen represent high. Another 5 dozens or so represent medium. And all the other ones are low. It doesn't necessarily mean that there are no issues in the other one, because as the learning takes place, what happens is the algorithms get refined more and more. The more data you feed, the more learning you have. The more learning you have, the sharper the control points inside, what we call the algorithms, are able to detect, the granularity of the detection become even better. So with AI, machine learning, the key is to have as many sets of data available to consume them by the computer, by the software, so the learning becomes self-fulfilling prophecy where the sharpness of the algorithms increases over time. So if you were to run the same set one time, you'll get extremely good results. But if you now do a lot of learning over big sets of data, it may sharpen some of the results and make them even more accurate.
Ellie, when I get the idea that you can do the analytics or the analysis once the data is there, sort of a post environment, but what about the pre-environment? When the data is being entered or when the data is being generated, when the accountant is putting together that accounting database, is there impacts on the front end of the process of either the way the data is being generated or the way the accountant is recording it and storing it? Is this ability to do this analytics going to have an impact on the front end of that process?
Absolutely. You know this notion of garbage in, garbage out. So currently you have over 500 ERP systems used worldwide by the companies that are actually entering the data. The provenance of the data really determines how well the analysis is taking place. Now, blockchain technology is going to change all of that. Within the next 3 to 5 years, when people will start to use blockchain, the provenance of the data will be well defined, and you are sure that the data entered is correct. Now, when you transfer data from one system to another, depending on the methodology that you are transferring, if it's done via USB, if it's done via direct connection, depending how the accuracy and the fidelity of the transfer is taking place. If it's a CSV file, it can get corrupted and so on. So what is important, and we are seeing now, we are able to connect directly to the cloud into the ERP system. This gives you the highest fidelity possible. And then you don't have any human intervention in the sense that the data is going from one computer to another one without human intervention. But absolutely true. The front end is where most of the challenges take place in order to acquire and ingest the data. If the data ingestion is not done properly, you basically garbage in is garbage out.
Now, Elliot, earlier in our conversation today, you also mentioned the difference between error and error with intent. And you were mentioning that you were focused primarily on the errors or the patterns. Is it also possible that we could do analytics on the data to get some sense of intent? Is it possible that the context of the environment in which the data is captured may also be used in the future? For example, it may be that somebody does an abnormal pattern of data entry, data accounting, but there's good intent behind it. It could be that the way that the organization is structured, that some transaction can't be done in a normal way, so they do a workaround, they get the job done, but it's not with evil intent. So is it possible that AI, based on the data or based on external information, can someday look at intent?
I like that you said the word someday. The answer is yes, someday. At this point in time, we need the professional judgment of individual to determine if the intent is malicious or erroneous, commission or by omission. As more data sets go through the AI engine, clearly we will detect over time certain patterns that we can categorize as intent to defraud. At this point in time, though, it's premature. The data sets are not that extensive yet, although we have a lot of data sets, but we don't want to get into the jurisdiction of really the professionals who can take these, because at this point in time, we are providing results and we are scoring the different transactions and saying to the professional, you make the judgment. So we would like the professional to make the judgment. But when you mention one day, absolutely yes. One day we will see that an AI will be able to determine the intent as well, based on looking a lot of set of data. And obviously if the pattern repeats, and you can tell that, and it's very simple. It's just, and this is the beauty about AI. It's just like when you see how the computer were able a few years back to determine that it's a cat. After doing a lot of reading, a cat, that they can determine a cat is a cat. If you remember the Google approach when they did all of the reviewing of YouTube to determine what is a cat. Well, the same thing will apply. One day after you see a lot of data sets and you will see a lot of errors that deemed fraud, the computer will be able to one day to determine that as well.
And when I think in terms of the patterns of error within the data itself, as well as the ability to find intent, does that suggest that one day that the computer or the system, the analytics system, will be able to detect intent in real time?
So you know that there are two schools of thoughts about how AI will work. And I want to repeat again that currently many of the systems that when we talk about AI is really the machine learning. The true AI, if you want to look at artificial intelligence, where a machine mimics what human will do, we talk about the ultimate singularity, and people talk about the year 2043 when you're going to have singularity, at which point a computer can behave almost like a human being at the same level. So if we ignore it between now and then, things will evolve. So ignore what will happen in singularity. Presumably at that point, a lot of things will change. But between now and then, you'll be able to do more and more to become and behave like a human, but it's going to be a long process. We're talking literally another 20, 25 years. Obviously, the futurists are talking that a lot of changes, and it may take even faster. But I think that it's okay to utilize what we call augment the human intelligence with computers versus singularity. So between now and the singularity event, we're going to utilize and rely on the professional to make the last judgment and the last decision. We just supply them with the tools to make the decision more intelligently, faster. And when you say in real time, yes, there is no reason why you cannot read the information in real time. With today cloud technology, with AWS and Azure and all the other suppliers that are providing cloud services, there is no reason why you cannot do it in real time.
That's very cool. As we come to the end of our podcast, Eli, can you give us some takeaways for our listeners?
Key takeaways that AI is here. AI is going to change everything that we do. As a matter of fact, if you read end-to-end blogs, Andrew used to be the chief scientist of Baidu. He's at Stanford University, and he compared the impact of AI to the impact of electricity on the world. AI is going to change everything. AI is here to stay, and it's really important that all of us will realize that our lives are going to be a lot better, more efficient, and more fulfilling, because we're going to see a lot of more efficiency, a lot more accuracy, and a lot more product that are going to rely on AI to perform functions that are done right now, not necessarily as efficient, as accurate. And we're going to basically enjoy new technologies and new product that will make our life a lot easier.
Okay, thank you for joining us today, Eli. Thank you for that insight.
My pleasure.
All right.